This is the phone call that broke the silence. For months, Donald Trump has treated the entire Western alliance like a protection racket. Pay up or get hit. Bend the knee or face the tariffs. From Greenland to Germany, from Mexico City to Montreal, the message has been the same. America first and everyone else last. Leaders around the world have quietly absorbed the blows. They have issued polite statements. They have sent envoys. They have swallowed their dignity whole and asked for seconds. But this morning, Monday, March 9th, 2026, one man stopped swallowing. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney just ended a phone call with Donald Trump. And instead of the usual diplomatic fog, the usual paragraphs of mutual respect and shared values and looking forward to continued cooperation, Carney posted 3 words that are now echoing through every embassy, every trading floor, and every situation room on the planet. Stay in close contact. That was it. That was the entire readout of a conversation between the leaders of 2 of the most economically intertwined nations on Earth. No pleasantries, no progress, no breakthroughs, no joint statements about shared prosperity. 3 words that, in the language of international diplomacy, translate to a single devastating admission. The call went badly, and the White House has said nothing. As we speak, the West Wing press office, the most aggressive rapid response operation in presidential history, an operation that fires back at perceived slights within minutes, has gone completely dark on this one. No rebuttal, no insult, no correction, no Truth Social tirade at 3 a.m, just silence. And in Trump's Washington, silence does not mean peace. Silence means fear, because what Carney just did, what those 3 words actually represent, is the most dangerous thing that can happen to a bully. Someone called his bluff, and the whole world is watching to see what happens next. In this special report, we are going to break down exactly what happened on that call. We are going to explain why 3 words from Ottawa are more threatening to this administration than any congressional subpoena or special counsel investigation. We are going to show you how the CUSMA trade deal, the very agreement Trump bragged about negotiating himself, is about to become the economic weapon of mass destruction pointed at the American heartland. And we are going to answer the question everyone in Washington is too afraid to ask. Has Donald Trump finally pushed the one ally America cannot afford to lose past the point of no return? Stay with me. This one changes everything. To understand why Carney's 3-word readout just detonated like a depth charge underneath the Oval Office, you have to understand the financial plumbing underneath this relationship, because this is not about hurt feelings between 2 leaders. This is not about diplomatic protocol. This is about $700 billion a year in cross-border trade. This is about 60% of America's crude oil imports. This is about 85% of its electricity imports. This is about the largest foreign supplier of steel, aluminum, and uranium to the United States. This is about the 36 U.S. states for which Canada is the #1 export destination. Not China, not Mexico, not the European Union, Canada. The quiet neighbor to the north that most Americans take for granted is, in fact, the single largest economic artery feeding the American body. Nearly $3.6 billion in goods and services cross that border every single day. And Donald Trump has spent the last 14 months trying to sever it. It started with the tariffs in February 2025. 25% across the board, slapped on Canadian goods under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Trump called it national security. Economists across the political spectrum called it economic warfare against your closest ally. The Canadian GDP took an immediate hit of roughly 1.5 to 2%. Canadian households absorbed an estimated $1,700 to $2,000 in higher annual costs. But here is what nobody in Washington wants to admit, what nobody on Fox News or in the Oval Office will say out loud. The pain did not stay north of the border. General Motors built $3 to $4 billion in expected tariff costs directly into its 2026 financial guidance, presenting it to investors as a core risk factor. Car prices in America went up by at least $1,500 per vehicle because of steel and aluminum tariffs alone. Farmers in Wisconsin, manufacturers in Michigan, energy workers in North Dakota, small businesses in Maine that depended on Canadian tourists. They all felt it. The tariffs were supposed to bring Canada to its knees. Instead, they bled America's own heartland dry, and the bleeding has not stopped. And here is where it really gets serious. Because Mark Carney did not respond to the tariffs the way Donald Trump expected. He did not beg for relief. He did not send envoys to Mar-a-Lago with gifts and flattery. He did not cave to the pressure the way the Trump playbook assumes every leader eventually will. He did the one thing that terrifies the Trump economic team more than any threat on earth. He diversified. In January 2026, Carney flew to Beijing and signed a preliminary trade agreement with Xi Jinping. Canada agreed to allow 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles into its market at a reduced tariff rate of 6.1%, down from 100%. In return, China slashed duties on Canadian canola seed oil from 85% to 15% and lifted punishing tariffs on lobster, crab, and peas. Then Carney went to India, then Australia, then Japan. 12 new trade deals on 4 continents in 6 months. And when he bragged about it to Trump on a phone call in January, sources say the president was, quote, impressed. But that impression did not last, because the message behind those deals was unmistakable. Canada is building an exit ramp from the American economy, and they are doing it in broad daylight with no apologies and no hesitation. Trump's response was predictable and furious. He threatened a 100% tariff on all Canadian goods if Carney went through with the China deal. He posted on Truth Social that Carney was sorely mistaken if he thought Canada could become a drop-off port for Chinese goods entering America. He called Carney governor instead of prime minister, a deliberate insult designed to reduce a sovereign national leader to a subordinate provincial administrator. He rescinded Canada's invitation to his so-called Board of Peace. He even threatened to block the opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge, a $4 billion crossing between Windsor and Detroit that Canada paid for entirely with Canadian taxpayer money. But Carney did not flinch, not once. He went to the World Economic Forum in Davos in January and delivered what multiple international commentators called the most important speech at that gathering in a decade. He stood in front of the assembled leaders and financiers of the global economy and declared that the rules-based international order, the American-led system that has governed global trade since the end of the Second World War, has experienced, and these are his exact words, a rupture, not a transition. He warned the room that compliance will not buy safety. He told middle powers to stop pretending the old system still works, and he received something that almost never happens at the World Economic Forum, a standing ovation from the assembled prime ministers, finance chiefs, and CEOs of the world. Standing ovations do not happen at Davos. This one did. And it was a standing ovation against Donald Trump. Don't go anywhere. The most explosive part is coming next. Because what happened after Davos is where this story turns from a trade dispute into a full-blown credibility crisis for the American presidency. Trump's Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent went on Fox News the very next evening and claimed that Carney had very aggressively walked back his Davos remarks during a private phone call with Trump. This was a calculated move. Classic information warfare. The White House was trying to rewrite reality in real time to make it seem like Carney had buckled, had apologized, had come crawling back to Washington with his tail between his legs. It is the oldest trick in the Trump playbook. Claim victory whether you won or not. Assume no one will check. Carney's response was devastating in its simplicity. Standing in the House of Commons in Ottawa the next morning, January 27th, he looked directly into the cameras and said 7 words that shattered the entire narrative. I meant what I said in Davos. He then added a line that sent shockwaves through the diplomatic corps on every continent. The world has changed. Washington has changed. Almost nothing is normal in the United States. That is the truth. A sitting head of state, an ally, a member of NATO and the Five Eyes intelligence alliance, publicly declaring on the floor of his own parliament in both English and French that the United States of America is no longer a normal country. That is not a trade negotiation. That is not a diplomatic disagreement. That is an obituary for the old alliance. And the White House had no response. Because what do you say when your best friend tells the world you have lost your mind? And this brings us back to yesterday's phone call, March 8th, 2026. Carney and Trump spoke for what sources describe as a tense, brief, and unproductive conversation covering the economy, Middle East developments, and trade relations. The official Canadian government readout was exactly one sentence. They agreed to remain in close contact. In the language of diplomacy, in the grammar of power that every foreign ministry in the world reads like a heartbeat monitor, this is the equivalent of a doctor saying, "We will monitor the situation." It means nothing was resolved. It means the patient is critical. It means no one is optimistic. Here is what nobody in the mainstream press is connecting. 3 days before this call, on March 5th, Carney made an extraordinary public statement from Australia where he was busy signing yet another trade deal. He declared that CUSMA, the Canada-United States-Mexico agreement, the very trade deal that Donald Trump personally negotiated during his first term, the one he bragged about to rally audiences across the Rust Belt, the one he called the greatest trade agreement in history, has been, and again, these are his exact words, effectively broken in the short term by U.S. actions. He said the United States had violated the trade deal through its tariff impositions. The American president's own signature trade accomplishment, declared broken by America's closest trading partner. And the formal mandatory review of that agreement is scheduled for July 1st, 2026. This is the ticking time bomb underneath the entire North American economy. If CUSMA is not renewed, if Canada walks away from the table, or if the renegotiation collapses under the weight of impossible demands from Jamieson Greer, Trump's trade representative, then every single product crossing that border faces the full weight of Trump's blanket tariffs. No exemptions, no protections, no grandfather clauses, no soft landings. The auto sector alone would hemorrhage tens of billions. Energy prices across the northern states would spike overnight. Supply chains that have been integrated for 40 years, that were built on the assumption that America and Canada would always be partners, would fracture in weeks. And here is the part that should keep every American voter awake at night. The CUSMA review happens in July. The midterm elections happen in November. If this trade deal collapses in the summer, if energy prices spike through the fall, if auto plant layoffs cascade through Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, those are not random states. Those are the exact swing states that decide control of Congress. Trump is not just losing an ally. He is potentially losing the midterms. He is potentially losing the House, the Senate, or both. And he knows it. The man who prides himself on winning, the man who defines his entire identity through dominance and deal-making, is staring at the possibility that his own tariff war against Canada will hand the Democrats the biggest electoral gift since Watergate. Let me explain why those three words, stay in close contact, reveal something even more dangerous than a failed phone call. They reveal a strategy. Carney is not fighting Trump the way previous leaders have fought him. He is not screaming into cameras. He is not tweeting insults back. He is not engaging in the reality television combat that Trump thrives on. He is doing something far more lethal to a man like Donald Trump. He is simply walking away, quietly, methodically, permanently. Since taking office in March 2025, Carney has spent nearly 60 days abroad. He has visited Europe, Asia, the Pacific, the subcontinent. He has signed 12 new trade agreements across 4 continents. He has doubled down on reducing Canadian dependence on the American market, setting a formal government target to double Canada's non-U.S. exports within a decade. And here is the number that should stop every American policymaker in their tracks. In April 2025, for the first time in recorded history, Canada exported more seaborne crude oil to China than to the United States. America's largest energy supplier is now selling more oil to Beijing than to Washington. The economic reorientation that experts said would take a generation is happening in months. And it is not just government policy, it is cultural. Canadian travel to the United States has dropped by over 40%. Casino revenues in Las Vegas from Canadian tourists have collapsed. Vermont ski resorts report the disappearance of Canadian school trips that once filled their mountains and water parks. Bookings at U.S. mountain destinations tracked by Intopia Business Intelligence sank more than 45% in January 2026 compared to the same month a year ago. Folk Alliance International's conference in New Orleans saw Canadian attendance drop from 17% to roughly 5%. Canadians are selling their vacation homes in Florida. They are canceling trips to Arizona. They are redirecting spending to Costa Rica, to Europe, to anywhere that is not America. This is not a government mandate. This is a cultural boycott by 38 million people who collectively decided that the country that called their prime minister a governor and threatened to make them the 51st state does not deserve their money. Now let us talk about what this means for global power, because the implications extend far beyond the 49th parallel. When Carney stood in Davos and said, "If you are not at the table, you are on the menu," he was not just speaking for Canada. He was speaking for every middle power on earth that has been bullied, tariffed, insulted, and threatened by the Trump administration. Australia heard him, India heard him, Japan heard him, the European Union heard him. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum praised the speech publicly. Sweden's former prime minister called it very important and very well put. Former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull said his country should deliver the same message. We will not be intimidated. We will uphold our sovereignty. What Carney is building is not merely a trade diversification strategy for one country. It is a counter-alliance, a coalition of nations that have decided independently but simultaneously that the United States under Donald Trump is no longer a reliable partner, that the era of American economic leadership, the 80-year consensus that governed global commerce since Bretton Woods, is over. And Carney said that explicitly. The 80-year period when the United States embraced the mantle of global economic leadership is over. So how does this end? It ends at the CUSMA review table in July, and the options are catastrophic in every direction. Scenario 1. The agreement is renewed with minor changes, requiring Trump to back down on virtually every demand. The MAGA base sees capitulation. The trade hawks revolt. Scenario 2. A heavily renegotiated deal that includes permanent tariffs and structural concessions. Carney has made it clear he would rather let the agreement lapse than accept subordinate status. Scenario 3. Collapse. CUSMA enters annual review limbo, extending uncertainty through 2036. Investment freezes. Plants close. Jobs disappear on both sides of the border. Scotiabank has called it the single most consequential macro uncertainty facing the Canadian economy this year. But it is equally consequential, perhaps more so, for the American economy. Because Canada has been building lifeboats for 14 months. America has not even admitted the ship is sinking. Watch the CUSMA review timeline. Watch for Carney's next overseas trip. Watch the midterm polling in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Watch the auto sector layoff numbers. Watch for the Supreme Court's ruling on Trump's use of IEPA for tariffs. Because if that authority gets struck down permanently, the entire trade war architecture collapses overnight. But most importantly, watch the silence from the White House. Because when Donald Trump is not talking, when he is not insulting, when he is not posting on Truth Social at 3 a.m. with capital letters and exclamation points, that is when you know he is scared. That is when the bravado falls away and the calculation begins. And the calculation right now is terrifying. 3 words from Ottawa. Stay in close contact. And the most powerful man in the world could not think of a single thing to say back. Canada is not bending. The alliance is fracturing. And the man in the Oval Office who thought he could bully his way to a better deal just discovered that the quiet neighbor upstairs has been packing his bags for months. The exit is not a threat anymore. It is a timeline. And that timeline runs straight through the CUSMA review in July, through the American heartland economy, through the midterm elections in November, and through the legacy of a presidency that bet everything on the idea that strength means never having to compromise. Mark Carney just proved that sometimes the strongest message is the shortest one. 3 words. And the White House fell silent. Subscribe. Stay tuned. Because when that CUSMA review begins, this story will make everything we have covered so far look like the opening act. The main event is coming, and America is not ready.